Hi grade 12s and welcome to today's session. My name is Hayley and I'm going to be taking you through the lesson today, which we're going to be dealing with data handling. It's a stunning section. You need to practice data handling, and what's so nice about it is it actually comes up about, and I'm going to go rough estimate of about 25% of both of your papers. So it's really important that you get a handle on this. I think the best thing for us to do is to actually go ahead and do some questions. So let's see what we have. Question one, let me get a pen. Question one is adapted from the November 2011 paper 1, question 4.1. So we're going to read the question and then we're going to answer. We're going to read all the information and then answer the question. The Swartberg Howe Foundation Committee intends opening a school uniform shop in January 2012. They foresee that the shop will mainly be supported by the new grade 8 learners, because clearly the other learners have all got uniforms. They survey a sample of grade 8 learners in June of 2011 to determine their shoe sizes. And then we're looking at shoe sizes of boys. We've got 5s, 6s, 6.5, 7s. And what I noticed straight away about this information is that it is in order. So whenever I look at data, I always think to myself, do I have to rearrange them or are they in order? So I look out for that. So I know that's in order. That's perfect. Let's look at the girls. The girls, we've got 3.5, 4, 5s, 5.5, 6. Again, also in order, which is really great. So it takes a little bit of pressure off. I don't have to rearrange them. So the first question is, what is the modal shoe size of the boys? So quick reviser, the mode is your most often. So we're going to look through, and we're looking for boys. We're going to look at the boys' shoe sizes, and I'm basically going to kind of count how many of each size I have. And I don't have a lot of information there, not a lot of data, so quite easily at a glance I can see how many are the most. So I can see I've got 3 5s, but then I've actually got 4 6s. I'm going to underline them as like I count them along. Check my 6.5, I've got less than 4. 7s, I've got less than 4. 7.5, there's only 1. So clearly the modal, the one that occurs the most often, is 6. So that's easy enough, and yeah, I've got 2 marks that are kind of in the bag already. Determine the median shoe size of the boys. Well, median is my middle number. And now, so let's just revise that. Let's write that in. So median is my middle number. And remember, this must be in order. So I'm just going to write that because I always keep that in the back of my mind, although I have already checked that they were in order. So let's go back to our data, to the boys. I'm going to change colors so that I can actually cross them off. So I'm going to start at the first and cross off the last, the second, and I'm just going to carry on crossing off until I get to at least 1 or 2 numbers. So carry on crossing off. Right, and I end up with 1 number. So clearly that must be my median. So my median is 6.5. Right, let's move on to the next question. So now I need to determine the median shoe size for the girls. So I'm going to go back to my information, but now I'm looking at the girls, and I'm going to basically do the exact same thing. I'm going to be crossing them off, and I know some of you like to use your fingers and you like to use your finger. Well, I tend to like to use a pen because it just makes it easier for me to ensure that I don't leave out any numbers. And in this case, I end up with 2 numbers. So I'm going to highlight both of those numbers. So, and it falls between the 2. So my median for the girls is 5.5 and 5.5, and I need the number in between. But clearly there is no number between 5.5, so quite easily I can see that that number is 5.5. But if we had 2 different numbers, so let's just look at an example. I'm going to do it with a totally different color pen. If I had 2 different numbers, like for example 5 and 7, and I'm looking for the number in between that, what I want to just point out, and the reason I'm doing this example, is that I want you to use your calculators, and guys, use your fraction button on your calculator, because your calculator needs to use BODMAS. Your calculator does use BODMAS. We need to use BODMAS. So on the calculator, use the fraction button and say 5 plus 7, divide by 2. and we get the answer of 6. And then the other thing I want to point out, let me get that pen back, is that you need to ensure that that number is actually between the two numbers, because a common mistake that often occurs is that we're so much in a hurry to answer the questions that we just type into our calculator. So what we do is we say, well, okay, I know I've got 5 plus 7 and divide that by 2, and my calculator does BODMAS for me. So it's dividing before it adds. And I get an answer of 8.5. Doesn't make sense because it's not between 5 and 7. So you need to make sense of the answer. And I know my favorite saying that all my kids say to me is, but the calculator said so. But depends on what you've entered into the calculator. So always double check. So getting back to our question, we didn't even need to use the calculator because 5.5 was our answer. Which shoe size are not worn by the boys? So let's go back to our data, and we want to see our boys start at 5. Then we go to 6, 6.5. So what we're missing is we're missing a 5.5. So I'm going to just fill it in here. We're missing a 5.5. 6, we got 6.5. 7, 7.5. 8, 8.5. 9.5 we're missing. 10.5 we're missing. And they really don't tell us where we need to go up to, but we're missing an 11.5. And in actual fact, we're also missing the 3.5, 4, 4.5. So it's kind of a little bit of a strange question because they don't explain where they want us to start. And I don't think men's shoes start at much below 5. So I'm going to go with the answer of our men's shoes. We're missing, we'll go back up, we're missing 5.5. We are missing 9.5, 10.5, 9.5, 10.5. And I'm not even sure about this 11.5, but you know what, you can always add it. And in actual fact, you could say, well, if shoe sizes start at 5. So let us actually say that we've assumed that our size starts at 5. Because then it actually tells your examiner that you know what you're doing, that you actually realize that there are shoe sizes less than 5, but probably not for boys. Let's move on to our next part of the question. Write as a ratio the number of boys not wearing half sizes to the number of girls not wearing half sizes. So what am I actually looking for? I'm looking for the number of boys who are not wearing half sizes, who are wearing full sizes, and to the number of girls doing the same thing. So let's now go back to our data and count this. Well, my boys, I've got 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So I've got 14 boys. To the number of girls, and I count those, I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15. 14 to 15. Now, if we want to simplify this, or check whether we can simplify it, when we've got ratios, what's wonderful about your calculator is that you can use your divide button. So 14 divided by 15, and we see that the fraction I get is still 14 over 15, which means that it cannot be simplified any further. But if you have a fraction that is a ratio that can, then you will see the fraction change. So let me give you a quick example of that while we're busy with that. So for example, if I had to say I had 2 to 8, just for example, on my calculator, I'm going to say 2 divided by 8, and I see my ratio will then be 1 to 4. And your calculators are really wonderful because they help you with a lot of different questions. So that's using the calculator. Right, I think it's time we move on to the next question. Question 2 has now been adapted from the Feb-March 2011 Paper 1, Question 1.4. The peak time cost of a cell phone call is R2.90 per minute. the off-peak time cost for a cell phone call is R1.90 per minute. Now they give us a little bit of information, which is really important to read and take note of. So peak time is from 7 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night every weekday. Off-peak time is from 8 o'clock at night to 7 o'clock in the morning on weekdays, and all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and public holidays. So now we've got an idea of when off-peak and peak are. I know most of you got cell phones and you have some idea of when off-peak and peak are, but always read the information in the text. So, because they will give you the information that you need. We might not be sure, is it 8 o'clock, is it 7 o'clock at night? And I think different cell phone companies have different off-peak times. Then we've got a graph, which is great. The graph they've given us is the peak and off-peak cell phone calls, the cost. On our y-axis, we've got our cost in rand, and on our x-axis, we've got time in minutes. And they've given us two graphs. We've got our off-peak graph, which is the white one, and our peak graph, which is yellow. Calculate the cost of a cell phone call of 5 minutes made at 13:24 on Monday. So my first question is, which graph am I going to be looking at? Now they've given me the graph, so all I need to do is interpret it off the graph. I'm going to read those values off the graph. Monday is peak time. So I'm going to be looking at the yellow. I need peak call. 5 minutes. So what I do is I take my ruler and I start at 5. I draw it up to my yellow graph. Then from my yellow graph, I draw a line to the axis and I do the reading here. So this reading, let's go back to my yellow, is what I am reading as the value. So if I look at my graph, now I've got to work out how much is that. So I see that that's 10 rand and there's 15. So each one of these has to be 1 rand. So that's 11 and 12. And this is between 14 and 15. So we can say that it is 14 rand 50. That's reading it off the graph. Alternatively, we could have said, well, okay, we've actually been given the formulas. And we could have said, well, in fact, we've taken 5 minutes. And we know our cost per minute was 2.90. So our cost per minute was 2.90. And we can get that answer with a calculator. So we got 5 times 2.90. And we get an answer of 14.50. So either way is fine. So you can see that either way we get the same answer of 14.50. But every now and again when we're reading off the graph, we don't have like an exact number. Sometimes we've got to estimate what it is. And in this case, your examiners give you quite a bit of leeway for this estimation. So go back to my graph, assuming it is between 14 and 15, there will be a little bit of leeway. Halfway is the easiest. It looks like it's halfway. So let us carry on. Right, moving to the next part of the question. The question says, calculate the cost of a cell phone call for 5 minutes made on a Saturday. So what am I doing on a Saturday? I have off-peak. So in this case, it is off-peak. And what I need to do is I need to read it off the white graph, because remember our white graph was our off-peak time. Now we're still looking at 5 minutes, so I'm going to let's get out a different color, 5 minutes, and we're going to, no, that was the, okay, we'll carry on with that. So 5 minutes, let's get our green out. And we're going to draw up to that graph, and across from that graph, and remember this is the reading that I need to do. So I'm going to be reading this amount over here. And again, I'm going up in ones, so this is between 9 and 10. So I'm going to say that is 9.50. Let's do our calculation, because we know that. So we got 5 minutes times by, what was our price? Our price was 1.90 rand. So times 1.90 rand. And on our calculator, get our calculator out, we got 5 times 1.90 rand. And again, we get 9.50 rand. So in this case, both of them were, in fact, the exact same amount. But remember what I said? You can actually do a little bit of an estimation. So, and there is a fair amount of leeway when you're reading off a graph. And in actual fact, what I would do is if you had a question like this where you could do it either or, well, I would check it. I like to do things twice. But if you're running out of time and you're thinking you're not going to have enough time, or you're very confident with your graph skills, then write that R9.50. And you know what? Just next to this, you can actually say to the examiner, I read it off the graph. Reading from graph. Because remember, we always tell you we want to see every single step of your calculations. But when you're reading a value of a graph, we don't know how you got to that value. So rather tell us, I actually read it off the graph. And then in that case, your teachers will also give you that little bit more of the leeway. Because your R9.50, maybe it was R9.45, or maybe you said it was R9.55. And I would actually have marked that correct. But I had to know that you were reading it off the graph. Otherwise, if you're going to do the calculations, show this step. Always show your calculations. Okay, let's see what our next question is. Our next question says, you have only 9 Rand worth of airtime. Write down the maximum number of minutes that you can talk on a Tuesday at 9 o'clock in the morning. So first of all, we need to work out. Tuesday 9 o'clock in the morning is weekday. It is our peak time. So again, in this case, we are dealing with peak. So what color was that? It was yellow. So we are dealing with peak. So once again, we're going to be using the yellow graph. And now we're going backwards. We have our total. So we're going to take our total. We have 9 Rand to spend. We're going to go to the graph. And then from the graph, we're going to go down. And we're going to be reading the value here. Now let's get my pen back out. So I can see that that is 3 minutes. But I'm not sure how they actually charge. And if they charge, if I spend over 3 minutes, they're going to charge me for the next. And I'm pretty sure that that's what's going to happen. So my maximum number that I can actually read, the maximum number that I can actually talk for is the number before where my graph cuts the x-axis. So it has to be 3 minutes. So the maximum number in this case is 3 minutes. Anything more and I'm going to be charged for the next number of minutes. And right, before we move on to the next question, I actually think maybe it's time to take a little bit of a break to give you guys time to stretch, go get a snack, or quickly make a cup of coffee. And I've got one of my colleagues that makes a cup of coffee in about 30 seconds flat. Go make yourself a quick cup of coffee. But guys, come back so that we can carry on with data handling. I'll see you shortly. Welcome back, grade 12s. I hope that you managed to stretch and you got something to drink or eat and that you're ready to carry on. So let's move on to our next question. Right, we're going to be dealing with question 3, and this is adapted from the November 2011 paper 2, question 5.1. So now as soon as it's paper 2, I know that it is a little bit of a higher thinking level and a little bit more challenging. So let's do this, and we take it one step at a time. So we've got Bethany High School and Vuka Secondary School entered some of their learners in a science competition. The scores in percentages for the first round of the competition are given below. So we got Bethany, and if I've pronounced that incorrectly, I do apologize. And I'm looking at their scores. We've got 59, 67, lots of 67, 72, and I see that it is in order. Perfect, I love it. Don't have to do anything with that. Keep that in the back of my mind. Vuka Secondary School, straight away I can see that it is not in order. So I kind of highlight this and I realize I'm going to probably have to change that somewhere along the line. I also see that I've got way more people at Vuka Secondary School. So I've got 90, 67s, and I'm looking through this list very carefully. I know I'm going to have to rearrange it. Let's read what the question is. If a learner is selected randomly, as soon as they tell me that a learner is selected randomly, I know I'm dealing with a little bit of probability. from Vuka Secondary School, determine the probability, there you go, that the learner scored more than 90%. And we've got to write this answer as a simplified form. First of all, more than 90% means above 90. So we've got 91 and above. So we're going to go to Vuka Secondary School, and I'm going to look at all my lists. I'm going to see that's 90, but it's not above 90. So I'm going to leave that one out. Have I got any others that are over 90? There's a 95. There's a 98. So I actually have 2 that scored more than 90. So my answer is 2. But out of how many? I want to know out of my total. So I'm going to count how many were there in total. So we got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. 2 out of 14. So they want us to write it as a fraction and needs to be in simplified form. Now this is another crucial hint, and I think I say it every time I'm on. Always go back and reread the question, because now I've done the probability, I've calculated that. But the question actually said, write the answer in simplified form. And sometimes if I don't go back and reread the question, then I miss out those crucial marks. So let's go and work that out on the calculator. You might not need a calculator, but I also tell all the kids that I teach, I say to them, you know what, you've got a calculator in the exam. Rather use it, because especially when we're in an exam kind of stressed situation, sometimes we do silly things. And I know that all of you can divide 14 by 2, and you know that 2 goes into 14, but sometimes we really make the most careless, silly mistakes. So rather use your calculator. 2 divided by 14, and we get it as 1 over 7. So perfect, write that in my pen, 1 out of 7. And it's simplified, and it's great. And those 3 marks are fine. And I'm guessing one of those marks was actually for writing it in a simplified form. Right, let's move on to the next part of this question. The following table shows the median, the mode, and the mean and range for the 2 schools. So we've got table 2, median, mode, mean, and range, the name of the schools. So I want my median, mode, mean, and range. And I need to determine P, Q, and R. So for Vuka Secondary School, for me to find the median, I'm going to start with there. For me to find the median, I need to have them in order. Don't forget that. So I'm going to look at these values, and I'm actually going to probably struggle a little bit. Let's see if this place... No, I'm going to carry on this page. I want to rewrite these. I'm going to rewrite them just here so that it'll be easier for me to move the board down. So I'm writing them exactly the same as they are at the moment. Okay, a little bit more space I've got. 90. So I'm just rewriting them so that I've got them and we can see them right to put into order. So I need to order these. Highest, lowest, lowest to highest is really not important. So I like to go from the top, from the bottom down, and from lowest. And one of the ways that we can order these is something called a stem and leaf graph. I'm going to use a stem and leaf graph. You can go through the list. I know your instinct is most of you to say, well, which is my lowest value? And write that in, kind of cross it out, or highlight all the 40s, all the 50s. So whichever way you use to put them into order is fine. But just remember, count the number of values you start with and count the values you have once you've ordered it, and make sure that those are the same. So I'm going to show you how to use a stem and leaf graph, but I'm just going to check first. I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 values, and I knew there were 14 values. My stem and leaf goes as follows. I'm going to use my tens are going to go into this unit, and my units are going to go into that part, the leaf part. So I can see that I go from 40, so I've got 4s, 5, 6, 7, hope we're going to fit this in, 8, let's put this up a little bit, and 9. Right. And then all I do is I actually write in these numbers and I go in order. So I start, and I can even change colors. Let's change colors to make it a little bit more colorful. So my 90, I've got 9 tens and 0 units. Then I've got 67, and 67 again. So again, 6 tens and 7 units. 89, 50, 78, 54, 67, 95, 90, 98, 57, 49, and 78. Now you can see from this it is so much easier for me to actually put them in order because I've got very few numbers in each one. So in order, let's change our color to, let's use pink now. In order, I've got 49, 50, 54, 57, 67, 67, 67. And as I'm going along, I'm thinking this number's occurred a few times, so it might be my mode. And I carry on doing this. 78, 78, 89, 90, 90, 95, and 98. And another crucial fact, actually, is I didn't need to rewrite the whole list in order. I really only needed the 2 middle numbers. So if I know there were 14 values, and I know 7's halfway, I need my 7th and 8th value. But it's probably easier to just write them all out. Now I'm going to take another color, and I'm going to cross them out as I go along. So I'm crossing those 2, that one, that. So I'm crossing them out as I go along, and I realize that I've got 2 values left. So I've got 67 and 78. I could have also counted them, so I've got 2, 4, 6, 7, and I know my median is there, so 2, 4, 6, 7. So between 67 and 78. And now let's find a little bit more. Okay, we can do it here. So 67 plus 78 divided by 2. My calculator, remember I said use your fraction button. We've got 67 plus 78 divided by 2 gives me an answer. Check that it is between the 2. 72.5 is perfect. So 72.5, need a pen for that. 72.5, and that is my median. Or in this case it was, what we were looking for was Q. I think we were looking for Q, no, P. Sorry, P. And I'm going to go up and I'm going to actually write it in here. So it was 72, try that again, 72,5, and remember, percentage. My mode's been given to me. In fact, I've checked it. I knew that it was 67 as I was writing out my values. What is my mean? So I'm going to do the mean, and my range is 48, which has also been given to me. So my mean is now adding up all these values and dividing by how many. So we can do this and add them all up. So I'm going to use this part of the right. Let's get a calculator out, and I'm going to add them up from here, which kind of makes sense. I've got them all. So 49 plus 50, and check as you're adding that you are typing in the correct number. In fact, I suggest when you're adding a whole lot of numbers like this that you actually add it up twice and make sure that you have the same answer. So 67, then I got 78. And if you don't get the same answer, then of course you can do it a third time and see where you made your mistake. But if you're checking as you're going along, you might not need to do it twice. But most importantly, so we're going to add those up, is 1029. Most importantly is I want you to show your working. So when it comes to the mean, oops, okay, we can't write today. The mean, I want us to show this value. Because if you've made a mistake adding, even if you've checked it twice or 3 times and you're kind of making the same mistake, you will get method marks for calculating, for dividing by the correct number, which was our 14, and for your answer. So you might lose the mark for the actual adding up correctly, but you will get the other 2, and it's normally out of 3 marks. So let's get our calculator out. I've already got my 1029, so I can divide by 14, get an answer. It was 73.5. And remember, that's percent. And in fact, that should have been percent here as well. So 73.5, I'm writing that in here. And finally, the one thing we haven't been given is R, our range. Remember, our range is our highest minus our lowest. So I've got 99, because we're dealing with the other school, minus 59. They were in order, so I don't have to worry about that. And again, you can do this in your heads, but you know what? We've got a calculator, so let's use it. And we see that it's 40. So my range here is 40. Right, determine the missing values of P, Q, and R. We've done that. We've answered the question, and we can move on. Might have to come back to that, I'm sure. Right, which school performed better in the competition? And explain your answer. So let's go back. We had 72.5 here. I just want to go back and rewrite those numbers. 72 and 73.5. So here we had 72.5, and there we had 73.5, and that was 40. So which one did better? And we need to explain our answer. So if we look at the two, right, our modal class is the same, so we really don't need to compare them. So we can actually cross them out, or we can actually say the mode was the same. So let's say mode was the same. Right, when looking at our mean, our average, we see that this Bethany got 76.4, so I'm going to write that in, 76.4%, because in your explanation, what I want to see is I want to see the numbers. I want to see the maths that you are actually basing your answers on, okay, compared to VUCA that had 73.5%. Then we're going to look at our medians are very, very similar. So here we've got our median, so this was the mean. Right, our median, we're comparing 72% to 72.5. Really not much in that, 0.5%, and then we don't really need to worry about that. And our range, of course, was now 40 to 48. So there's two things that we can really look at that really stand out. One is the mean, and one is our range. So what we see from our mean is that this Bethany High School actually performed better. They had a better average overall. And one of the reasons they had a better average is that their range was smaller. So they actually had like all their people within a smaller value than VUCA, which had a larger range from and a lower median. So there's one example. So I'm going to go with who was it, and I'm going to say, well, it was actually Bethany, because they've got a higher mean and lower range. I'm also going to look at their lowest mark was 59 compared to our 49. So that could also be a difference. Okay, we weren't told which is a pass rate, but our lowest was 59, which is really great. Our highest as well was 99 compared to 98. So can you see that this explanation could be quite a lengthy explanation, but always use the numbers whenever you're explaining something. Hey, I think it's time we can move on from this question. The table below shows the percentiles of scores obtained in the science competition for the two schools. So we got the 25th percentile, 67% compared to 57%, 60th percentile, and the 75th percentile. So list the scores of the learners from VUCA House Secondary School who scored at the 75th percentile or more. So we're going to VUCA, and that was 90% was the 75th. So we're looking from 90% upwards. So what are those values? Going back to my list, I had, and remember you're going to be using your one that's in order, so it'll actually be easier for you to work with. We've got 4 that are higher. So we've got 90%, 90%, 95, and 98. Let's move on. How many learners from VUCA Secondary School obtained scores that were less than the 25th percentile of Bethany. So we are looking for less than 67%. And we're looking for Vuka High School. So we want less than 67%. I always like to write out what I'm looking for. So it just makes it easier for me to remember, especially if you get distracted or something. So less than 67, we're looking for Vuka, and we've got there's less than 67, that one. And it was less than, so we don't have to include the 67. So that was our 49, it was our 50, was it 50? 54 and 57. And then the next question. The science competition consists of 30 multiple choice questions worth 2 marks each, 10 questions with one-word answers worth 1 mark each, and 10 short questions worth 3 marks each. Except for 12 multiple choice questions, Lindiwe answered all the other questions correctly. The competition records show that she was a learner from Bethany High School. Verify by calculations whether the records were correct. So what we need to do is we need to first work out her results. So there were 30 multiple choice questions. There were 30 multiple choice questions. She did not get 12 of them correct. So in actual fact, she only got 18 multiple choice correct. They were each worth, 2 marks each. That was her multiple choice. The rest she got totally correct. There were 10 questions that were worth 1 mark each, and there were 10 questions that were worth 3 marks each. So let's quickly work out what she ended up with. So it was 18 times 2 plus 10 times 1, don't think we need to do that, plus 10 times 3. So she had 76. Her score that she received was 76. She's from Bethany, so what we need to do is find out, did Bethany have a 76? So go back to that. Did they have a 76? No, they're missing a 76. So clearly the records are not correct. So there was no 76. Therefore, the records are actually not correct or incorrect. I suppose that's a better way of putting it. Hey, let's move on to the last question in this section. And this question says, Peter correctly answered all the multiple choice questions and scored a total of 95 marks. Determine one possible way in which he scored this total and show all your working details. Now, there are more than one way of doing this. There's actually quite a few ways of doing this. So what we need him to lose 5 marks. We know that the multiple choice was correct. So remember, there were 30 multiple choice questions and they were each worth 2 marks. So that is already 60 marks that he's achieved for that. Then we had 10 questions that were 1 mark each, and we had 10 questions that were 3 marks each. But I need this total to be 95, so I need to lose 5 marks. So what I can do is I can lose all 5 marks here. And let's rather say I want this to add up to, let's get a different color so we can see this. I'm going to make that add up to 30. Let's carry on with that. And now I've got 90 marks. And then I need 5 here. So in actual fact, what do I need to do? I need to say, well, okay, he lost 5. And I've got 5 times 1 is 5. And that adds up to 95. I could have done it another way. I could have said, well, okay, let me lose 1 mark in the 10, so that's 3 marks, and only get 27 here, and then 2 marks there. There were quite a few ways that you could actually do this. Okay, and on that note, grade 12s, I think it's time to take a little bit of a break, go stretch a little bit. I think we've been quite busy now, but hurry back, so I'll see you shortly. Welcome back, grade 12s. I hope that you had a good break and that you managed to stretch a little bit. We're on the downhill stretch, the last part of this lesson today. So let's carry on with the question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on with, in actual fact, still adapted from the same paper, but now we're going to go on to question 5.2. The principals of Bethany High School and Vuka Secondary School compare their school's 2010 matric results. The comparison of passes are shown in the table below. So we're looking at our table, and always analyze the table first whenever you see it. So this is the matric passes for the two schools. Bethany High School has got degrees. We've got 4 degrees, diplomas 5, certificate 20, and a pass rate of 96.67, compared to Vuka, who had 65 with degrees, 44 with diplomas, 25 with certificates, and 87.58% pass rate. Now the question says, how many learners of Bethany High School failed their matric exams in 2010? So we know how many passed. We know that 96.67% of them passed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work out what percentage actually failed. So on my calculator, I'm going to say 100 minus my 96.67. And I see that I've got 3.33% that failed. So let's write that fact in. We've got 3.33% that failed. And that's the number I'm looking for. But in actual fact, I haven't been given the total of how many learners there are at Bethany High School. But what I do know is if I add these up, my 4 and my 5 and my 20, because that's all the different ways that you can get a matric pass, I know that that represents 96.67. So let's write that fact out. Let's add that. So it's 4 plus 5 plus 20. I think in this case we need a calculator. Well, the whole lesson I've been saying use your calculator. We've got 29 learners that represent 96.67%. And now I want to know how many learners actually represent this 3.33%. And that's what I'm looking for. So I want to know how many learners is actually 1%. Or I can think about it as a ratio. Well, it is a ratio. So all I'm going to do in this case, I'm going to see, well, what do I do here? I'm going to do the same thing there. So what I do here is I times by the second number, and I'm going to leave out my units, which in this case is a percentage, times by my second number, divide by my first. And I'm going to do the same thing to my 29. So I'm going to end up with 29 times by 3.33 and divided by 96.67. In other words, I'm taking my 29 and I'm basically working out, I can divide it first if you'd like, dividing it by 96.67 because that gives me what 1% represents. Then times by 3.3 and that gives me how many failed. So let's do this on our calculator, and I'm going to say 29 and I'm going to times it, and that's right, I'm going to use the fraction button, 3.33 over 96.67, and I get an answer of 0.998. But remember, I'm dealing with people. Okay, so I'm dealing with numbers. So I always write in that answer. So let's go back to a 0.998. In fact, if I'm going to round it off, it's going to be 1. But if it's not rounded off exactly, I want you to write it in. So it's 1 person. And now we can actually check our statistics. Because in actual fact, if I look at I had 29, we can double check this by saying, well, in actual fact, I had 30 learners in total. 1 over 30 times 100, just to double check that my percentage is correct. And my calculator out, right? So I've got 1 divided by 30 times 100. And you can see that there is my 3.33. So clearly it has been rounded off along the way. Right, have I answered the question? Let's go back and check. My question said, how many learners? I've got how many learners. I've actually answered it. It was only 1 learner. Failed the matrics exam in 2010. Perfect. Let's move on to the next question. If a learner from Vuka Secondary School is chosen randomly, what do I know randomly? Probability. From those who passed, what is the probability that this learner qualified for degree studies? And give your answer as a percentage rounded off to 1 decimal place. So I want my favorable outcome. So this is qualified for degree purposes. So I'm looking at degree purposes is 65. Divided by, what is my total? And I'm looking for, of the learners who passed. So I want to add up, let's take a different color to show you that. I want to add up all of these values. So I'm going to get my calculator out, and I'm going to say 65 plus 44 plus 25. Those are all the ones that passed. There were 134 that passed. So divide that by 134, and I've been asked to give this as a percentage, and this is where it's important that we reread the question. So as a percentage, I immediately know I need to times by 100. So let's get our answer out. So we're going to say 65 divided by 134 and times by 100, get a percentage, and I get my answer 48,51. Okay, 48,51. Oops, need a pen for that. And then go back and reread. And remember, it said 1 decimal place. So in actual fact, I can just delete my 1. So 48.5. And don't forget, this was a percentage, and we need our units. It was percentage. So 48.5%. We've rounded to 1 decimal place. We've given them a percentage. We've worked out the probability. We've done everything they've asked because we've reread the question. Let's move on to the next question. Right. In 2010, 153 learners wrote the matric exam at Vuka Secondary School. Analyze the results of the two schools to determine which school performed better and motivate your answer by giving at least 2 valid reasons. So they've given us the total for Vuka High School. We can, and always when you're using these, I want you to use your numbers. So I'm going to actually work out how many failed at Vuka High School. That's going to be one of the calculations that I have. So I know that there are 153 learners that wrote. I also know that just now I calculated that there were 134 learners that passed. So let us work out that number of people that failed, and I see that it is 19. So in this case, I have 19 learners that failed, and this is Vuka, so don't forget to add that. 19 learners failed. So what can I do? I can look at the percentage. So firstly, that's jumping out at me that Bethany performed better. They only had 1 learner failing compared to 19, but even as a percentage, they had 96.67% pass compared to 87.5 at. So that would be the first kind of one that I look at. But I'd like to look at degrees. I'd like to see how many of our learners actually got degrees. And we're going to need to compare this as a percentage because Vuka looks like they've got way more, but we know they had way more to start. So let's work out our degrees. Let's change our color here. So we're going to work out degrees. And we're going to first work with Bethany. Now we had 4, just double checking that was the correct number, 4 out of 30, and I'm going to work that out as a percentage. And then for Vuka, let's change colors for that. We're going to say, well, they had, how many did they have? They had 64, I think it was 65 out of 153, and also work that out as a percentage. So let's get our calculator out. I'm going to say 4 divided by 30 times 100, and I get an answer of 13.33%. So we got 13% there. I'm going to round it off. It's not really important. I'm looking at a whole number now. It's just going to be easier because I'm using it to compare. So it doesn't matter if I round off the stage or not. And the other one was 65 divided by 153 times 100. Check your calculator. Times 100. Okay? And we get 42%. So that, let's do that in yellow. 42%. So what can I say? I can definitely say, well, in this case, Vuka performed much better. So And we can do that for the two schools. We can carry on analysing the two schools and work out who did better in each kind of category. So I'm going to go with, in actual fact, it's probably more important for us to get degrees, and Vuka did much better than Bethany. But can you see what kind of calculations I want you to do? You see what kind of argument I want you to make? And don't forget to add the maths to the argument. And definitely when you're comparing, you must compare percentages. So I could carry on doing it with diplomas and all the rest. Right, let us rather move on to the next question. Peter's in front of the queue, this was question 5.3, sorry, to buy a chocolate for his mother and randomly chooses a chocolate. There are 50 chocolates left that are wrapped as follows. We've got 17 silver, 20 gold, and 13 red. Determine the probability that Peter will choose a chocolate wrapped in red foil. So my probability is clearly just my favourable, so how many reds have I got? I've got 13 reds. Out of my total, there were 50 chocolates. And I can leave my answer like that. If you'd like, you can write it as a percentage. It hasn't asked me to write it as a percentage or a decimal, so I can literally leave my answer like that. Don't even really need to simplify it. Can I simplify it? Let's just check like we did at the beginning of the lesson. We say 13 divided by 50 on a calculator, and I can't even simplify it. So there's my answer. Next question, and I think this is our last question for today, is a green foil. What's the probability that Peter will choose a green foil? So go back to my text. Did I have any green? I had no green. And this question, they love asking you this kind of question, where there's actually no chance. Absolutely zero. Lovely question, and normally worth 2 marks. So it's really a nice kind of gift that your teachers or your examiners are giving you. So what is the probability? It can be 0 out of 50, or we could have just written it as 0 or no percent. Anything like that would have been fine. And that takes us to the end of our questions. And I hope that you've actually enjoyed this session. I hope you know a lot about data handling. And remember, I want you to practice before your exam and use your calculators. So don't buy a brand new calculator at the beginning of the exam, and you need to practice on your calculator. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope to see you again soon, and good luck for the exams. Bye.